I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, with Apple's big services announcements in the rearview mirror, its ongoing legal dispute with Qualcomm is back front and center. How Apple just escaped an immediate import ban on its iconic iPhone. Plus, securing the vote, Congressman Ro Khanna is sounding the call to protect the 2020 elections from foreign interference. We discuss his plans to getting it right next year. And esports is getting a new venue. Comcast is investing $50 million into a stadium specifically designed for the next generation of gaming. But first, to our lead, Apple has escaped a possible import ban on its iconic iPhone. The decision coming after a U.S. trade agency rejected a patent infringement claim filed by Qualcomm in the second of two cases brought before the U.S. International Trade Commission. Earlier today, however, a separate ITC judge said Apple infringed a different Qualcomm patent and recommended a ban. Here to discuss, Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman, who covers all things Apple. Also with us in London, Tamlin Basin, who covers tech litigation and policy for Bloomberg Intelligence. So, Tamlin, what exactly does this mean?
So we'll start with the second decision, which is the most immediate. It came out about 15 minutes ago. This was a decision where the full ITC was reviewing a administrative law judge's decision. That decision said that Apple did infringe a patent, but that judge actually refused to issue a sales ban, and a sales ban is sort of the special relief that the ITC can grant. The ITC reviewed that. We were thinking we might get some sort of analysis of whether a sales ban was appropriate, given these sort of underlying 5G concerns that pushing Intel out of the chipset market would sort of diminish U.S. competition in the chipset market. The agency entirely sidestepped that. They just said they ruled that this Qualcomm patent was invalid, so the case was over. It didn't reach those sort of sticky 5G issues.
Meantime, Mark, just before this, another judge recommended a ban, saying Apple did infringe a different Qualcomm patent. So how do we take these two rulings together?
So these are two distinct... Oh, sorry.
Mark, take that one.
These are two distinct patents, both related to Qualcomm patents in regard to battery technology and making batteries and phones last longer. Now, the two cases were at different points in the process. This was the final agreement on the one that just broke about 15, 20 minutes ago. The other one from earlier today around lunchtime was earlier in the process, and that was a judge's initial view on it. This will still go to the higher court in the ITC for a final ruling. The impact here would be specifically likely on the iPhone 7 and iPhone 7 Plus, which are due to be discontinued probably this year or next anyways, but it still would have a multi-billion-dollar impact on Apple if they had to stop selling the 7 and 7 Plus in the U.S.
So, Tamlin, what then happens next with this, where the judge has made this initial recommendation and not on the side of Apple?
Right. So I think, as Mark alluded to, we have a July 26th, I think, is when the ITC is going to review this decision. It's where it's slated to give its final ruling on this. After that, if it recommends a sales ban on these iPhone models, then there's actually a 60-day presidential review period where the administration could decide whether or not it would allow a sales ban to take effect. And it could overrule that. And then so we could potentially be looking at a sales ban by late September if this all went in Qualcomm's favor.
Now, Mark, give us a little bit of an overview. Obviously, we know that Apple and Qualcomm have been engaged in lawsuits around the world. Some have gone in Qualcomm's favor, some have gone in Apple's favor. Is it clear right now which company has the upper hand?
In terms of who's having the upper hand, I mean, you have to look at it from a consumer perspective, or at least that's how I look at it. And right now, Qualcomm is where it's at in terms of 5G technology. They're about a year ahead of Intel. And there's a reason why Apple is unable to likely release a 5G iPhone this year. That's because they are using Intel parts which don't have 5G this year, and they won't have it until probably the beginning or middle of next year. So from that perspective, Qualcomm is winning. Apple is not had banned any phones really in the United States at this point, so they're not really losing either. I would call this a draw at this point.
Tamlin, would you agree with that?
So I think what Qualcomm did get today was it got a pressure point that can sort of force Apple to the table. What Qualcomm really wants is a settlement. It wants Apple to begin paying royalties and Apple's contract manufacturers to begin paying royalties again. And I think this gives it this potential sales ban, even though it's not until 3Q, gives it a potential lever point. And of course, we have an upcoming trial in April that's going to be another huge deal for both companies. But I think for Qualcomm today, it is definitely good for them to get one of the ITC rulings in their favor.
Mark, what are the companies saying at this point about this most recent ruling? Have we heard from them yet?
Now, the other point about Q3 is when they come out with new iPhones anyways. The iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, the phones at hand here, those came out in 2016. Those are due to probably be discontinued around Q3 anyways. So if that is indeed the case, it doesn't expand to other devices. It's not really going to have a wide-ranging impact. Qualcomm put out a statement, to answer your question, earlier today, praising the judge's decision, but we are yet to hear anything from either side on the second ruling from 15 minutes ago.
So, Tamlin, globally, what is the next big milestone for either one of these companies in this ongoing legal fight?
I alluded to it. There's an April 15th trial scheduled for San Diego, and this is sort of the huge heavyweight bout between the two companies. It's Apple initially filed the lawsuit alleging antitrust violations, breach of contract claims. Qualcomm shot back with claims of its own. So this is a potentially 3-week trial that starts April 15th, and I think that's going to be the next indicator of who may have the upper hand.
All right, Tamlin Basin for Bloomberg Intelligence in London and our very own Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman. Thank you both for weighing in. Of course, we're going to continue to follow every one of those decisions. Coming up, can the U.S. government safeguard the 2020 presidential election from foreign interference? And what is Silicon Valley's role? We're going to hear from Congressman Ro Khanna about his plan to ensure they work together. That is next. And if you like Bloomberg News, you can check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 election is wrapped, though the political fights will certainly continue. And there is still plenty of work to do ahead of the 2020 presidential vote. Congressman Ro Khanna of California has laid out what he believes needs to be done in a Washington Post op-ed, writing, quote, "Completely preventing the injection of foreign government propaganda into our discourse is impossible, but we can ask our tech industry to reduce the amplification of such messages and more quickly detect, quarantine, and report organized foreign influence efforts to U.S. officials." Congressman Khanna joins us now from Capitol Hill. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you back here on the show. So it's time to secure the 2020 election is the title of your op-ed. What do you mean, secure?
Well, Emily, as Bob Mueller found, the Russians hacked into our emails. They manipulated social media. They clearly wanted Donald Trump to win. We need to make sure that whether it's the Russians or any other foreign country, they never do that again. And there's some very simple things we can do. First, technology companies can form a consortium so they can share information about bots or bad actors and make sure those actors are removed from those platforms. Second, our law enforcement agencies can better coordinate with tech companies. I mean, tech companies don't have all the resources to do all the intelligence work. They need to be working with law enforcement. And a third point, we need to label these ads. A consumer needs to know, are they seeing an ad that's been paid for by a foreign entity, and who is actually behind these online ads?
Is there anything that Congress can do legislatively to make sure, though, that that coordination happens between the U.S. government and U.S. intelligence and these tech companies? I mean, it seems like a lot is just falling through the cracks.
We can. We can give funding to these law enforcement agencies to specifically help private companies with cybersecurity and with fighting foreign interference. We do this all the time, right? I mean, we don't expect Facebook to be responsible solely for their security. They may have private security, but they still have the protection of our military and police forces. Well, they should also have the assistance from our intelligence agencies to help them identify who the bad actors are on their platforms. Then they have a responsibility, of course, to remove those bad actors or to make sure they aren't spreading propaganda. This actually is also a bipartisan issue. I've talked to people on the other side of the aisle about the need for Congress to step in to make sure this doesn't happen again.
So, you know, we just saw this live video of a mass shooting in New Zealand go up on Facebook's platform. Nobody caught it for 17 long minutes, and it certainly sort of diminishes faith in the ability of the tech industry to take strong action on some of these things. I mean, do you think we're really better prepared now than we were in 2016 to prevent this kind of interference from happening on tech platforms?
I do think we're better prepared. I've spoken to many tech leaders, and they've taken this and do take this very seriously, and they have instituted far greater safeguards into their platforms to make sure that they're ready to act. I mean, you mentioned the New Zealand shooting, which was just atrocious and awful. And it took maybe a few hours to remove the video from every site, but it's a hard problem because once the video is out there, if it has over 1 million shares, it's not easy for anyone to remove it. So we have to understand that this is a difficult issue, and it's going to require investment in artificial intelligence. It's going to require better coordination. But I do think that many of the leaders understand their responsibility.
Do you think big tech gets how big an issue this is, and do you think there's truly the will there to invest the human and technological resources to make this happen?
I do. I mean, they're citizens of our democracy, and they understand and want these platforms to enhance democracy. When you speak to them, they'll talk about how proud they are of the Black Lives Matter or Parkland kids having social media as a platform to get their voice out, or how much they were excited about the Arab Spring. But they also understand that these platforms have been abused for hate crimes, for suppressing votes, for the awful human rights violations in Myanmar. So they want to solve this. What they say, though, is they can't do it alone. They need the help of law enforcement agencies, and they need the help of the government to invest in resources. That said, they have a responsibility, and there are things they can do themselves, such as disclosures of ads, such as making sure that they limit the virality of propaganda or hate speech.
Meantime, big tech is sort of getting bipartisan scrutiny of late. Democratic presidential candidate Senator Elizabeth Warren calling for the breakup of big tech. Senator Ted Cruz supporting her on that. Do you think that's the right way to go?
I don't agree with them on that. I don't want China to have the only big tech companies. I mean, it would be an irony if Alibaba, Tencent, and Baidu were dominating the world. I do think we need stronger antitrust protection. I think the paradigm should be the Microsoft case. There, the government said Microsoft couldn't privilege its own product. It couldn't tie Internet Explorer, and they prohibited that, but they did not break Microsoft up. That seems to have worked well. It led to the rise of Netscape, of Google. And we see in technology that the giants of the past, like AOL or Yahoo, are often not the giants of the future. So strong antitrust protection, yes. Just breaking up big companies, no.
What kind of antitrust protection would you advocate on Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook?
Well, what I would say is you shouldn't have anti-competitive platform privilege. And putting that simply, it means you shouldn't be able to prioritize your own products. Let's take a concrete example. Amazon shouldn't be able to say that when you go search for a detergent you want to buy, that the first things you'll see is Amazon Basics. They should make sure that every competitor has equal access to their platforms, not biasing their own products. I think those type of reasonable steps and strengthening antitrust law is a good thing. That doesn't mean, though, that we break up these companies into multi-parts and then allow Alibaba to succeed and become the world's platform.
So you represent Silicon Valley. Have any of these tech giants or the executives at these companies reached out to you personally to express their concerns about government interference or regulation?
Well, I have conversations with them all the time, and there are times where they think I'm going too far with my Internet Bill of Rights, or even talking about stronger antitrust enforcement. But ultimately, they respect that because it's intellectually defensible. What they don't like is just painting with broad brushes and just a politics of demonization. Ultimately, tech remains very, very popular when you go around the country. People like using tech products. They want tech jobs. They want smart regulation. But I think Tim Cook has said it best. What we need is well-crafted regulation.
So, as I said at the top, Mueller's investigation has wrapped. We have the Attorney General's summary of it. Are you satisfied with that, or do you want the full report to be released to the public? And do you think at this point Congress should move on?
We definitely need the full report released to the public. The American taxpayers paid for the report. We should see the report. And we particularly need to see the report on obstruction of justice. I mean, Bob Mueller, after 2 years, didn't make a conclusion about whether the president obstructed justice. Who is Bill Barr to make that kind of conclusion in 36 hours? If Mueller wanted Bill Barr to make the conclusion, he would have used that in his report. The fact is, Mueller wanted the American people to make that conclusion. He wanted Congress to make that conclusion. We need to see the full report.
All right, Congressman Ro Khanna, appreciate you joining us, of California's 17th District, joining us there from Capitol Hill. All right, now to a headline coming out of the SEC. A federal judge in Manhattan has scheduled a hearing for April 4th in Elon Musk's contempt fight with the U.S. regulation agency. The judge wants to hear arguments from Musk and the SEC on whether Musk should be held in contempt for tweets the SEC says violated an earlier agreement. Both sides said they didn't want a hearing over the evidence, but the judge will hear the arguments. Coming up, Europe changes the internet. A potentially big and dramatic change. A new set of copyright rules could drastically change the way content is uploaded to the web. We'll discuss next. This is Bloomberg. The EU has backed a new set of digital copyright rules that could change the face of the internet. Under the new law, tech platforms will have to get permission from publishers like musicians and news media before posting user content included in such uploads. But free speech activists fear this could lead to censorship. Earlier, we spoke with Gianpiero Lotito in London. He is the president of the European Tech Alliance.
Copyright and data protection are fundamental to have a future internet where everyone can compete at the same level. So I think that is a very, very important vote. Of course, as always, when you set new rules, something can appear draconian, can appear too strong, but in the long term, normally, everything is rebalanced in the more effective and more right rule for all.
Are you at all worried that this or other EU legislation could restrain the growth of European tech companies?
No, because the absence of rules made impossible in the last 10 years, 15 years to grow a European tech giant. The capital union market, the digital single market, these rules will create better condition to grow the European tech giants in the future.
Do you think that these new copyright rules that the U.S. could adopt similar legislation?
Yeah, but the GDPR was an example for many countries out of Europe, and this legislation tried to make something that is in the real world, in the analog world, is normal. That you pay the creativity is the same for patents, in the same for many other rules. So I think that probably out of Europe, someone else, other countries can take this example as a good example to regulate the internet of the future.
There's still a fairly decent threat that the UK could crash out of the EU without a deal. What do you think this kind of Brexit would mean for technology in Europe?
For sure, UK will become a more attractive country because UK needs to attract more the tech company, the tech giant of the future. And for Europe can be the opportunity to set a relationship with a country that has an important economy in the continent. Of course, if the Brexit will be at the final point done as we think, because in this moment we don't know how the Brexit will evolve.
Do you think that this, on top of all of the regulatory pushback that tech is seeing in Europe, will actually put European tech at a disadvantage to U.S. and other tech industries?
But we need in Europe to have a digital industry that can compete at the global level, because we miss that, and this mess is important also for other industries, because without a strong digital industry, also the manufacturing cannot grow in the right way. So everything is happening in this moment is a rebalancing of the past situation, and I think that probably we will observe errors in the next year that will be corrected, but I think that the world needs a strong Europe in digital to be balanced.
And what's your take on GDPR and what the right side of history will be? You know, has Europe taken the right steps here, and is it something that the US should do as well when it comes to data privacy?
GDPR was a rule that came from the need to have more respect for the privacy and the data protection of the people. I think that in the culture of Europe, the data protection, the privacy for the European culture are stronger than in other parts of the world. So GDPR was the first solution, and as for the other things that I mentioned, and also the web tax, for example, we will see probably a rebalancing in the future, but without rules we will not have in Europe a digital economy at the level that Europe needs.
President of the European Tech Alliance, Gianpiero Lotito. More of Bloomberg Tech to come. Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Just one day after Apple's big services event, the iPhone maker barely escapes a possible import ban on its iconic smartphones. The U.S. International Trade Commission rejected a patent infringement claim filed by Qualcomm, but Apple isn't out of the woods. That decision came just hours after a separate ITC judge said Apple infringed a different Qualcomm patent and recommended an iPhone ban. That case subject to review by the full commission, which is expected to complete that investigation by July. Joining us now to discuss, Gene Munster, co-founder of Loop Ventures. So, Gene, it seems like Apple gained some ground, then Qualcomm gained some ground, and then vice versa. I mean, how do you expect this global battle to play out?
So it's going to play out over these small bumps in the road, the small roller coaster ride, inevitably, country by country, unfortunately. And I think to put some context on this, these headlines sound most concerning. Sound is, I think, the important word there. The substance is this is just purely noise. And ultimately, to answer your questions, how does this play out? We are going to see some varying degrees of announcements, both for Qualcomm and for Apple. But that doesn't change where the trajectory of the relationship between Apple and Qualcomm is going. And that relationship is moving in a different direction where they will eventually be separate. And you can point to some of the hires that Apple has had more recently in San Diego, similar to an acquisition they did about a decade ago where they started to build their own chips internally and vertically integrate. They want to do the same thing around technology that they currently license or are in dispute with around Qualcomm. So they have an option of moving in that direction. So the big picture, the simple reason why this is noise is that in the future, Apple is not going to be dependent on Qualcomm. And this irritation that is going on in the courts only accelerates that move for Apple.
The iPhone has been banned in other countries in other rulings pertaining to Qualcomm. I know that it mostly involves older models. So even if it's just older models potentially being banned, you think that's still just noise?
It is, and I think there's some dispute about which models under this most recent announcement are going to be banned. Apple uses Intel chips for their most recent phones. So most likely, to your point, it's going to be for some of the older phones. If you think about the simple exposure to Apple's business, let's say that the phones of kind of the iPhone 7 and before are banned in the U.S., and those customers don't purchase any Apple products, that probably has kind of a 5% headwind to the overall Apple business. So it is a measurable piece of the business. But importantly, I think I just come back to the central theme is that these customers likely are not going to make a decision based on a price point that's unavailable for them for $50 or $100 to jump to an Android phone. Apple has retention that has been steady for the iPhone between 90 and 95% over the past 5 years. And I think that availability or lack thereof of certain models isn't going to materially change that number in the near term.
Now, I want to get your thoughts on all of Apple's services announcements yesterday, but I want to start with streaming. Of course, we know that Apple unveiled its original streaming plans with much fanfare, lots of big celebrities, Oprah, Reese Witherspoon, but a lot of unanswered questions about when we'll be able to watch this content, how much is it going to cost. How big a deal is this new streaming plan that Apple is working on, not knowing the details?
Well, fortunately, we can fill in the details and agree that it's irritating that we didn't get a lot of the specifics, but I think we can back in there. So think of this as going to be a very similar price as what we see in the market today, which most of these streaming services are right around $15 a month. So it might be on the low end of that. So kind of a $10 per month. And then we can look at the number of ads that they've had in Apple Music as some sort of a benchmark for the next few years and think about where Netflix is at in terms of their subs as another kind of benchmark. And I think what you can build is a case for this video segment to be somewhere between 10 and $15 billion a year in revenue. Now, that would add kind of in of itself, call it around 4 or 5% to Apple's overall business. It does importantly not change the street expectations around services. For the street to have services doubling over the next 4 years, which is generally what most analysts are expecting, you need to have these type of new products like video. And so it is an important step, video, and definitely is an important step, but it is needed for Apple to kind of hit its marks that the analysts have set out for it.
And what about the new Apple News Plus service, which of course sort of builds on things Apple has tried to do before, though they haven't been, raging successes. And there's still some contention about just how much content from each of these publishers that have signed on will actually be available in Apple News Plus.
So of the 4 announcements, I think this was the one that was the most underwhelming, in part to try to resurrect the magazine business. I think is a losing game. People can get a lot of that same type of content in the photos and just through the web at large. And like you said, as the partners aren't quite there, Wall Street Journal is kind of the central partner. So when we think about the news opportunity, we think in 5 years that could be a $500 million business, $500 million, much smaller than where we think that their gaming segment and the credit card and what the video can be.
So the last 2, Apple Arcade and Apple Card, which was perhaps the least expected, but maybe the most impactful of all these announcements. What's your take?
So Arcade, we put kind of a 15% probability that would come out. My take is that it's a big market and that can be potentially a $3 billion a year business over the next 5 years. I think the part that really got me most excited on the margin was what's going on with the Apple Card. And for me, it is a step forward, a dramatic step forward. The other ones are variations in putting Apple's culture and position on the streaming market and the gaming market and the news market. But this, on the credit card, it's something that is very unique in adding transparency to the credit card. And I don't need to go through it feature by feature, but the simple analogy is think about your circles and your bands and bars around fitness, daily fitness. Imagine that kind of transparency with how you manage a credit card. I think it's going to be successful, and I think that it will be another example of one of those subtle things that people like about their iPhones. Not necessarily a huge business for Apple, but definitely helps maintain that high retention rate.
Right, and plus, don't you want a titanium credit card in your wallet, Gene? I know you do.
Can't wait. Can't wait.
All right, Loop Ventures co-founder Gene Munster, always good to have you with us. Thank you, Gene.
Thank you.
Okay, Comcast betting big on esports. The media giant unveiled plans Monday for a new $50 million arena designed specifically for competitive video gaming. The Philadelphia venue, known as the Fusion Arena, will have more than 2,000 square feet of LED screens, training facilities, and private rooms for streaming. It'll eventually house the Comcast-owned Philadelphia Fusion, one of 20 franchises in Activision's Overwatch League. Joining us now to discuss, Philadelphia Fusion president Tucker Roberts. Tucker, thank you so much for being here. So how will this arena be different from a traditional sports arena?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. You know, this is a tech building really at its core. Even through the design of it, we wanted it to look kind of like maybe the chassis of a computer. And you know, sports arenas are not known for being very technologically advanced, whether it's the Wi-Fi or whatever. You know, no matter how much you talk about it, they're never like, that's not the thing that you go there for. This is very different in that way. There's going to be LEDs and sound systems that are just first in class, and we really want to make it feel like, you know, this is a virtual experience that blows you away. So it's very core to the design that it's built with that in mind, and I think that sets it apart from what people are used to when they go to a sporting arena.
Do you think some of these esports leagues can become as mainstream as the NFL or MLB, and if so, when?
Well, I think it takes a lot of time, but yes, I think, you know, for your examples, the NFL and the MLB are only really watched in America. So they don't have a lot of followers in China. They don't have a lot of followers, you know, in Europe. This is esports in video gaming more broadly is a global phenomenon that transcends just, you know, a region like ice hockey being big in colder regions or football being only popular in America. So to answer your question, yes, I think it takes a lot of time though. You know, the NFL, you know, is as big as it is today because it's been around for like, you know, ever. But, you know, the average viewer of an NFL game is 50 years old or more. The average viewer of an Overwatch match is 27. So it's going to take some time.
Now, big tech is making an even bigger push into gaming. Apple and Google have just announced their own game streaming platforms. How much do you think these could change the industry?
Well, I think, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say they're going to change the industry, but that doesn't mean they can't be successful. The gaming industry is so much bigger than most people realize. It's about 150 billion annualized revenue right now and expected to go over 200. That's broken up into so many different business models of games. You know, you've got free-to-play games, you've got subscriptions, you've got premium titles, ad-based games. So, you know, I think there's a place for it, especially I think with Apple, they've gone a very, you know, Apple way, which is to say we're going to prioritize design and quality. Who cares what the industry's doing? You know, that's what we're going to do. So I think they will be able to carve out their spot in the market, but, you know, the market's huge, so it's tough to change it.
All right, Philadelphia Fusion president Tucker Roberts, fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, your electric car may be gas-free, but if it catches fire, it could pose a new problem for firefighters. We're going to look at how first responders are learning to deal with the perils of this new technology. More of Bloomberg Tech to come. This is Bloomberg. Adobe is broadening its strategy to win over more corporate customers. The company today announced a new software system called Experience Platform. It'll unify business applications that have been added in different acquisitions, and it'll connect them with new apps from third-party developers and customers' other programs. Adobe's move echoes the Salesforce strategy of acting as a hub for data. Well, first responders are quickly learning how challenging it is to stop electric car fires. A deadly Tesla crash in Florida teaching police that fire extinguishers won't work, and water isn't even a sure bet. In fact, there may only be two ways to put out a lithium-ion battery fire. Bloomberg Businessweek's Chester Dawson has the story from Detroit. So, Chester, you're focusing here on this Tesla car fire in Florida. What exactly happened there?
Well, basically, the vehicle ran into a tree, and the electric battery pack caught fire. And the initial first responders, which were a couple of police officers, tried to use their department-issued fire extinguisher, but it had no effect. And even once the fire department arrived on scene and doused it, the vehicle caught fire again 2 more times as it was being towed to the lot. So it just shows you that when you're dealing with electric powertrains, it's a completely different situation from your typical gasoline-powered engine. And the first responders, unless they're intimately familiar with the protocols, have got to learn how to deal with that as electric vehicles become more common on the roads.
So what are the protocols? How do you put out an electric car fire?
Well, it's kind of funny. I mean, as I think you mentioned in the intro, your typical chemical in a fire extinguisher has little or no effect. So the answer is to dump water, lots and lots of water, like thousands of gallons, whereas hundreds of gallons would do it for a gasoline engine powered car. The other alternative is just to let it burn out. I mean, Tesla and others recommend to first responders that if there's a safe place, you can just let the vehicle burn. That's another option, and maybe the only option, unless you've got thousands of gallons of water that you can use to pour on or submerge the car or battery.
Right. So, I mean, is it at all realistic to assume that any firefighter would be able to access thousands and thousands of gallons of water in an emergency situation?
Well, it's a good question. Essentially, that's what's needed to completely douse the fire. You can, get rid of the flames momentarily, temporarily with lesser amounts of water. But, these are the kind of questions fire departments are going to have to start asking themselves. Are they properly equipped for this? And what other, equipment they might need to make sure that they can deal with these car fires as more accidents happen. Now, it should be said that electric vehicles are no more likely to get in an accident or catch fire than a gasoline-powered vehicle. In fact, some research shows that it's less likely. But when it does happen, it's a more difficult problem to deal with.
Tesla, in an email called The Accident Tragic, said they'd reached out to first responders to offer cooperation. But is there any equipment that would make these fires easier to put out? Or it sounds like if you're an electric car and it catches fire, you're kind of out of luck.
Well, yes and no. I mean, typically, if an initial dousing will be enough to get the person out of the vehicle. I mean, there's a whole other range of issues with electric vehicles, such as they have high voltage cables. So if you're in a situation where a first responder needs to help you get out of the vehicle, say the door is jammed, in a typical car, they could use the jaws of life pretty much anywhere as long as they avoid the gas line. But in an electric vehicle, they've got to be very careful that where they access the car, where they cut, there's no high voltage cable, because that could be, potentially deadly for the first responder as well. And there's other issues too with these type of vehicles in terms of, where things are located and just being able to identify it as an electric vehicle. So what it's essentially requiring is a whole other level of education for first responders. So, they're aware and able to identify an electric vehicle and able to handle the unique challenges of those vehicles. Again, it doesn't mean it's any more likely that they're going to get in an accident, but when it happens, it's a matter of making sure the first responders are prepared enough to deal with it.
With more and more electric cars on the road, are first responders having that education? Do you know if that training is happening?
Yeah, it's coming in fits and starts, and companies like Tesla, and by the way, Tesla's not the only one. There's other electric vehicle makers, GM with its Bolt and Nissan with its Leaf, and these vehicles have very similar structures with their battery packs. So it's, as these become more common, first responders are getting more training. Now it's a bit, haphazard. There's no national standard for it yet, but there are certain departments that are, maybe the ones that have seen more of these incidents based on where sales are highest, and that happens in, Florida, California, those markets where EVs are more popular. But according to one industry organization, about 250,000 firefighters have had some level of training, and there are about 1 million firefighters or first responders in the U.S. So about a quarter of them have had some training, but that doesn't mean they're all experts.
Okay, Chester Dawson, you can read his story at Bloomberg.com and in this weekend's Bloomberg Business Week. Hear more from the magazine's reporters and editors every weekend on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Still ahead, Uber taking on the Middle East, how acquiring rival Careem will affect the region's ride-hailing competition. This is Bloomberg. NASA's historic all-female spacewalk has been put on hold, all because of the lack of fitted spacesuits. Astronauts Anne McClain and Christina Koch were scheduled to swap out batteries outside the International Space Station this Friday to conclude Women's History Month. But, according to the agency, both need a medium-sized spacesuit torso, and only one is readily available. Koch will now be accompanied by astronaut Nick Hague. Meantime, NASA spokeswoman Stephanie Shireholtz told the Washington Post that an all-female spacewalk is inevitable. NASA needs to get it together and make that happen. All right, after months of rumors, Uber is officially acquiring Middle Eastern rival Careem. In its priciest acquisition ever, Uber will buy the Dubai-based company for $3.1 billion, marking the first time it's bought one of its regional competitors. Careem has expanded rapidly over the years, operating in more than 90 cities and 15 countries. Joining us to discuss, DCM Ventures co-founder and general partner David Chow, who's an investor in Careem, and DCM's also an investor in Uber.
And Lime.
So was DCM involved in making this acquisition happen?
Certainly, a lot of the investors in DCM were also in the deal, so there was a lot of negotiations going back and forth.
Look, Uber has tried to expand into other countries many times, to great failure. What makes you think this is a good thing?
Well, I think this is a big victory for Uber because I think in China and Southeast Asia, they withdrew, whereas I think this time, I think the new management team took a less adversarial position and really built a really good rapport with the Careem management as opposed to, trying to beat them. And I think the Careem management team really believed that Uber is going to let them be independent for a while. And so I think, the deal was right for both sides.
So what do you think this means for ride sharing in the Middle East?
Well, I think that, there's 700 million people in the Middle East. It's a growing market. We believe that there'll be more competitors coming out, but I think for a while, I think the customers still have two choices, and they're not going to be run completely the same. So I think the consumers still would have a great option.
What's your outlook on the Uber IPO? I mean, we know that Lyft is losing almost half as much money as it's making, and that Uber has very much prioritized growth over profits and sustainability at this point. Do you think investors are going to buy into this?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, everybody wants the Lyft IPO to be smashing success because I think it will legitimize this sector. And I do think that this whole on-demand sector is going to see automation kick in. And then the labor cost, which is the largest chunk of the cost, is going to disappear.
So then all these drivers are out of a job.
Yes, but it also means that Uber and Lyft and Lime's, profits is going to skyrocket.
That's years out, though, maybe decades out.
I actually think it's going to be much earlier than people think, and also it's not going to be 0-1. Suddenly overnight everything goes automated. I think it's going to be gradual, but it also means gradually these companies' profits are going to continue to rise.
So you're also investors in Lime and focused on scooters and in cannabis.
Yes.
What do you see there?
Well, we see that this on-demand economy also extends out to the cannabis market. People want delivery to their homes. I think a lot of cannabis dispensaries are not necessarily in great locations. And so, for example, if you are, at night, you're a female wanting to buy cannabis, you'd rather have it delivered than going to, a store in the middle of the worst part of town. And so I think there's a great upside as, we also believe that it will be federally legal in the next 3 to 5 years.
Interesting. Lots of evolving stuff there. DCM Ventures co-founder and general partner David Chow, good to have you back here on the show. Thank you for stopping by.
Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Reminder, we are live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.